Okay, so now that we've seen how to map a class, let's take a look at some operations using Morphia to insert and update and delete our entities. We're going to look at a few basic examples to give you kind of a feeling for what things will look like. There's of course much more to cover and to see, but for those you'll have to look through the API and the test codes inside the Morphia project itself. But to cover the basic cases, we're going to take a look at some basic user management and repository. So going back to our model, as you can see here, this is some test code in project. So we're going to create a basic user, and in this case we're going to use my account again. So we're going to give it the username of Evan Chuli, my full name, and then we're going to give it this date. And yes, there are probably simpler ways to do that, but I was lazy and I hate the deprecation warnings. We're going to set my following count because I am of course terribly popular, so I have 1,000 followers on GitHub. So we're going to create our entity like this, just like it's any other Java object, because it is. And then we're going to save it into Mongo. So we're going to call our data store. We're going to tell it to save this entity, and we're going to pass in our object. And that's all it takes to save a basic entity. And there's really nothing more to it than that. It's really straightforward, of course. Where it starts getting interesting, of course, is when you start having some relationships. So we're going to create a couple of them here. We're going to create our organization of MongoDB, and MongoDB has a couple of repositories inside. So we're going to create a Morphia repository with the organization of MongoDB, and then my fork of it with my user, and then we're going to save those two. And then we're going to add those repositories to the user that we've already created up here, and then we're going to save it again. And then Morphia will update the existing document inside MongoDB with the new data, which has our two repositories added. But the interesting things really start happening when you go to query. And the query is a pretty fundamental thing to understand because it's actually used not only to find your objects, but to update them and to delete them as well. So the query syntax will start to look very similar as you perform each different operation. So how you do queries in Morphia is you tell your data store that you want to create a query, and then you give it the type. And as you see here, you get a typed query of repository. If you do an empty query, you can call get, and what this does is it actually executes the equivalent of a find one inside the shell and returns back the very first repository it finds, and who knows what it's going to get. It'll just get it in the natural ordering inside the collection, grab the first one and return it back, but you'll get a fully hydrated version of that repository, whatever it might happen to be. Now you could get them all if you wanted to. Query has a method asList, and that will return every single repository in the collection. This is helpful. Certainly it keeps things simple, but obviously if it's a very large collection, you're going to run into some memory issues here that you may want to be careful about. So if it is a very large collection, what you can do is you can call fetch. asList actually calls fetch under the covers, but it does the work for you that we're about to do. So what fetch does is it returns an iterator, which is technically a Morphia iterator here, as you can see that as we cast it. And Morphia iterator wraps the cursor into MongoDB, and then it lets you iterate across the result set, and then you can do whatever you want with it. In this case, we're just calling next on the iterator and doing nothing with returned objects. We could, of course, modify each one, or we could do whatever you want to them. So what this next code here is showing you is that the query is reusable. So once you've done iterating it, you can just call iterator again, and you can start all over again and be just fine. So if you want to do something more complex, because you don't just want to grab the first one, you don't want to grab them all of them, you actually want to be able to target and pull back specific items out of the database. So this is what this would look like. Query has a number of methods, and the one we're going to use here is we're going to call field. Now, what comes here can be one of two different things. As you'll recall, the default mapping inside Morphia is to use the Java field name as the property inside the document to use inside MongoDB. You can pass in that field name here, and Morphia is perfectly fine with it. If you happen to have used the @property annotation and renamed that field inside Mongo, instead of owner, perhaps it was repository owner, you could actually pass that string in as well, and Morphia will properly map it. So you can use either the Java field or the mapped property name, whichever one you choose to use. It helps to be consistent, but either one will work. So here what we're saying is we want to do a query on the field owner, and the comparison we want to do is we want to make sure that it equals my user, Evan Chuli. In this case, owner is a reference object inside the repository to a GitHub user, and this will compare that the user that you pass in has the same ID as the owner listed in the collection. And here we just call get, which will just find the first one that defines that matches this criteria. I might have 600 repositories, but this will just go grab the first one. So let's look at a couple more examples. We're going to query GitHub user in this case, and we're looking for member since. And as you'll recall, we mapped this one in the document as since, but we're passing in the field name here, and then we're passing in the date that we created up top, and we're calling get. And Morphia maps all that and converts it correctly. And if you were to run this test, you can see that we're getting back the right data. So the same query, instead of using member since, the Java field name, we're going to use since, which is the mapped property name that we used. The only real difference here is that we're using since instead of member since, and it comes back the same. So if you were to run this test, you could see that this object that we got back is the same as this object that we got back, despite using the two different field names for it. So those two are interchangeable, and whatever works for you. So we're going to do some simple updates like we've seen already. This one we're just changing the followers. I lost a bunch of them for whatever reason, but I decided to follow a whole bunch more, so I'm going to update those and then save it back, and the document in the database gets updated. Now, you don't always want to grab one object at a time and update it and run it back. That can be pretty slow because it takes time to go query the database, pull the object back into memory, update it, and then push it back into Mongo. It just takes a lot of work to serialize and deserialize objects like that. Morphia allows you to do updates directly in the database, in this case using the create update operations as you see here. So in this case, we're going to update the GitHub user collection. So the operations we want to give it is we want to increment the followers field, and then we want to do an explicit set to the following field and give it 42. So when this operation is done, everyone will have one more follower than they used to and will be following 42 other users. So this is only half the story. In order to do an update, we need to tell Morphia and Mongo which documents to update. So we're going to create a new query. Here we're going to create a query on the GitHub user, as you can see, and we're going to find all the GitHub users that have no followers. And then we're going to magically give them a bunch more. So when we're done, we call the update method instead, and we pass it the query that we gave it, and then the update operations that we just told it. So what will happen here is it sends off a series of operations to Mongo, and all these updates happen in the database without Morphia having to map data in and out of the database. And this is very useful if you're doing bulk operations because it can do everything at once inside the database without all the round trip of the network. I wanted to look at one last operation simply because it's interesting. If you'll recall, we talked about the @version annotation, which helps you catch mid-air collisions, so to speak, between two different processes trying to update the same entity. So in this case, we are going to go get the same organization twice, organization and organization 2. We only have the one in the database at the moment, so this gets us the exact same object. So we are going to make sure that it's the version 1, and then we're going to save it. And when we're done, now the organization has a version of 2. And then we're going to save it again, and that's going to be great, and we're going to make sure that we have 3. Now we're going to go save organization 2, which, as you'll recall, we got way back here, which has the original state of the object when this particular test started with a version of 1. So when we go to save organization 2, we will get the concurrent modification exception that you see here. And this lets us know that in between the time that we got organization 2 and the time that we tried to save it, an unknown number of updates were performed on that particular entity, and that this particular copy that we have is now stale, and that we need to then manage merging those conflicts, undoing the operation, or whatever it might need to be in order to make sure that we don't trample data from other operations. So that's just a quick spin through CRUD operations in Morphia. What we did not cover in this particular video is the remove operations, but it looks pretty much like this. Instead of update, we call remove, and then we only pass it a query, because we don't need those operations. There's a lot more to cover, of course. There are more query operations and update operations available, but to see all those, I really encourage you to look at the Java doc for those, and of course the documentation at the GitHub project for Morphia. All right, thanks guys.